Good morning, everyone. I am Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's New Hampshire Business Review webinar, Mental Health at Work, What Every Employer Needs to Know. Today's program is sponsored by Sheehan Finney. Let me introduce you to our speakers. We have Liz Hodgkins, Deputy Director, NAMI, New Hampshire. Jennifer Meckel, shareholder at Sheehan Finney, and Andrea Chatfield, attorney at Sheehan Finney. We're going to have presentations from each of them, and then we're going to do a Q&A at the end. So please do put your questions into the Q&A feature, and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And without further ado, let's dive in because there's a lot to cover and a really robust presentation today. So thank you all for being here. Welcome, Liz.
Good morning. I'm Liz Hodgkins. I'm Deputy Director at NAMI New Hampshire. NAMI New Hampshire is a grassroots organization working to improve the quality of life for all by providing support, education, and advocacy for people affected by mental illness and suicide. And how do we do that? Well, we're comprised of a network of affiliate chapters and support groups, staff, and over 200 volunteers. We provide education support in advocacy to families and communities affected by mental illness and suicide. Next slide, Morgan. So let's start with a quick little check-in today. We're not going to, nothing to share, nothing, just want you to take a moment and just think about it. Just take a moment and reflect. How is your stress level? Is it manageable? Are you engaging with social supports? And when was the last time you had fun? I want you to just think about what are the things that you bring to work every day? What are the things that are happening at home? Are you bringing yesterday's workday to today? I just want you to take a moment and just reflect about how you're doing. Next slide. So just want to take a look at the numbers of people who are impacted by mental illness at work. 57% of workers indicate negative impact because of work-related stress. And globally, $1 trillion is lost annually due to decreased productivity with mental health concerns. And depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide. So both companies and employees struggle when they don't invest in mental health. If you invest in creating a culture of caring, everyone benefits. So as you can imagine, these numbers really impact the bottom line. But it's important to talk about how widespread mental health concerns at work are. Next slide. So mental health concerns are really common. 1 in 5 adults lives with a mental health concern in a year. 1 in 20 people lives with a serious and persistent mental illness. So when we talk about this number 1 in 5, we're talking about how common it is, how many people will struggle with a mental health condition in a year. But if you are able to talk about that mental health concern, if you're able to connect with appropriate treatment, find your support network, know and connect with the right resources, you can be able to recover and participate in work, participate in community, participate in family. So it's about making sure that people know where to go to be able to get the help and connect with the treatment that is necessary to be able to take care of their mental health. Next slide. Oh, yeah, there you go. Thank you. So 32% of adults report anxiety and depression symptoms in a year. Click again. And 47% of adults reported anxiety and young adults reported anxiety and depression symptoms. So we're talking about how these are really prevalent, and just to note that of this 47% of young adults, these are people who are emerging into the workplace. So they're coming in almost 50% of them, almost half of them are coming in with a reporting that they have anxiety and depression symptoms. And to just note the generational difference, because many of these young adults, they're coming into the workplace and they're at a place where it's more commonplace to be talking about their symptoms of depression and anxiety, or their mental health, or taking care of their mental health, or their treatment, what their needs are. So it's important that we learn to create a culture where people feel like it's okay to talk about it, and you feel like you're prepared to be able to talk about this in the workplace. Next slide. 74% of employees say it's appropriate to talk about mental health at work, but only 58% report that they would actually feel comfortable. So it's, where people are saying it's appropriate to talk about it, but that really they may not necessarily always feel comfortable talking about it. So why is that? Click one more time. Those who reported feeling uncomfortable about sharing mental health cited stigma, lack of communication, and fear of retaliation as the reasons why they're not talking about their mental health. So what is it that really prevents people from talking about it? Stigma. It's real. It exists. It's part of why people hesitate to be able to talk about mental health. They want to acknowledge that it is a safe place, but part of you are all here today to be able to talk about how you can create a culture at your workplace so people can feel like they can know what the resources are, connect with mental health, know where to connect with mental health care and treatment, and know that they can get the help that they need. They can know that it's really common for people you can know that's really common for people to struggle with their mental health, and it's okay to be able to talk about it and connect with the right resources. Next slide. So what can you do? Well, part of what you can do is you can increase your awareness and education. So you're here today, you're learning more about mental health, you're learning about how to educate your coworkers and your community, and you're also creating a caring culture at work. You're leading by example. You might talk about your own mental health at work, not really broadly, but perhaps you're talking about, you're saying things like I would say at work, perhaps I would say, part of my wellness routine and taking care of my own mental health and well-being is by getting enough sleep, going to yoga daily, or taking care of my diet, keeping an eye on those things, taking care of my work stress. Notice the words that you use and learn about ways in which you can support your colleagues and team. And then you making sure that people know that how they can access care. What are the benefits? Are they in a way that feels accessible to people? Are you reminding people of the benefits they are? And later on in this presentation, we'll talk about some of the resources that NAMI New Hampshire has and other resources that are available so you can point people in the right direction. Next slide. So it's important that people feel like they can reach out for support when they need it. Employees who are less comfortable talking about mental health at work are more likely to report feeling burnout and that their mental health is suffering because of their work. Next slide. So why is creating a caring culture important? Without mental health support at work, people can experience feelings of isolation and loneliness, reduced productivity and performance, adverse physical and mental health consequences, strained relationships at work and home, and also the potential risk for self-harm. Next slide. So it's important that you consider and know the early signs of a mental health concern. So really what you're looking for is you're looking for changes in a colleague in the past 2 weeks, changes in how they feel, how they look, how they act, or how they think. And so if you have concerns and you've seen things and changes in a colleague that are very different, we're not going to review all of these things, but certainly just about how they're feeling, looking, acting, or thinking. And you then might say, let's have a conversation. So how do you start that conversation? Well, there are things that you should do and things not to do. So you want to talk privately. It's not something that you want to hear say allow other people to hear this conversation. We want to respect their boundaries, lead with listening and empathy, and let them know that they're not alone. We started this presentation early in this presentation. We told you 1 in 5 people are struggle with a mental health concern in a year. It's pretty common to share that they're not alone. Don't suggest that a diagnosis, minimize or dismiss, and don't be afraid to ask questions. It's important that you're not jumping in with solutions. We're not asking you to be a therapist. We're just asking you to start a conversation and prepare to talk about and point people in the right direction of the resources and treatment that they might need. Next slide. So language matters. So part of creating this culture is about making sure that you're feeling like it's an approachable conversation in your workplace. So you are not using mental health diagnosis in everyday language. So for example, you're not saying that you're OCD because everything on your desk is neat. People who struggle with an OCD condition certainly know that it's more than a neat desk. You might avoid words like crazy and insane. I happen to use the word wild all the time. You're really just sharing that the conversation about mental health feels approachable in your organization. One of the ones that's not on here, but if you're using disparaging comments about substance use disorder, would it make a person feel like you feel or your organization feels like it's approachable if they may be concerned about their substance use? So you're just considering how you can shift your language a little bit so that it feels like an approachable conversation at work. Next slide. Ooh, okay. So we'll talk a little bit more at resources towards the end of this presentation, but I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
Thanks, Liz. That was great. And my portion of the presentation is going to focus on an employee relations considerations for reducing chronic workplace stress. And some of what I will be talking about is going to pick up on what Liz was talking about and will hopefully also set a foundation for Andrea's portion of the presentation. So a 2024 survey by SHRM found the following. 44% of employees feel burned out from work. 30% of employees often feel stressed, 22% often feel anxious, only 50% feel a sense of belonging, and only 40% feel fulfilled. And why do we care about these statistics? On the next slide, to me, a real tie-in with this is the thought process that that chronic workplace stress and burnout can lead to mental health issues if not addressed. And so the focus in my mind about reducing chronic stress is to try to improve well-being. And why are we doing that in the workplace? Sometimes employers will ask me when I'm doing, trainings or having conversations like this with clients, they'll sometimes say, why is this my problem? Why do I need to worry about this? In addition to legal considerations that Andrea will explain, there's a lot of positives for employers. Those include promoting employee well-being, creating an environment in which all employees can thrive. When employees are thriving, they are more productive, and you are more likely to attract the employees that you want and to keep them. So there's a lot of business positives in this. Speaking of business positives, I'll also put it in the negative, which is to say that by focusing on employee well-being and reducing chronic stress, we can help to avoid absenteeism, presenteeism, which is when someone is physically present, but they are not focused, they're not mentally present. Reduce productivity, we want to avoid that, and reducing some of these other things that we know follow from when someone is experiencing mental health conditions. So what can you as an employer, on the next slide, what can you as an employer do to reduce chronic stress and promote well-being? there's a document that I think is very helpful. It's a framework for workplace mental health and well-being. It was created in 2022 by the then US Surgeon General. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about it because if you were to look at that framework, by the way, you will get copies of these slides afterwards. And where I've written the title of it is a hyperlink to that document. I have other hyperlinks for you as well, and you'll have access to that. When you look at this document, if you choose to, you'll see that there are 5 essential areas of workplace well-being. And in each of these 5 areas, there are things we can do as employers to move the needle down on chronic workplace stress. In other words, we really can effectuate change with thoughtful focus. The first essential area is protection from harm, and that's psychological and physical safety and security, some of which is obvious. Of course, we want people to have physically safe work environments. We're going to comply with OSHA, other safety requirements, and allow people physical safety, physical security. The harder part about protection from harm can be protection from psychological harm. If someone is going into a workplace on a regular basis, or if they're not going in, but they're remote, but interfacing with colleagues on a regular basis, and they're experiencing bullying, offensive comments. Liz shared with you some words that can be offensive to people struggling with mental health conditions, or if they're just sort of belittled, devalued, dismissed. These things can lead to a feeling of not being safe at work. And I will also, I'm going to chuckle for a minute that for someone who's been in the workforce for many decades now at this point, this notion of psychological safety was a little new to me. And I will tell you that people that are newer to the workforce, newer generations coming in, think about and talk about psychological safety quite a bit. It is not at all rare, not at all, for us when we're working with employers to hear from them that an employee has raised a concern of not feeling safe at work. And so this is something that is very top of mind for people. And it includes ensuring that people are free from discrimination, harassment, bullying. They also have a sense of knowing where they stand, that there's some transparency between them and their manager, and that there's a normalization of mental health issues, just as Liz was talking about. And another component of physical and psychological safety and security has to do with ensuring there's adequate time for rest. I think of that truly as being rest outside the workplace. Of course, you got a lunch break, but making sure that there's appropriate boundaries and adequate time to rest and recharge outside of work. The next essential area of workplace well-being is connection and community, which is around social support and belonging. And when we're thinking about that, we're really thinking about the networks and relationships that exist at work. There was a study that I read, not the framework, but a study that I was learning about that said that one of the best predictors of retaining an employee and having them have a sense of belonging at work is whether they have a best friend at work. And so that might sound slightly simplistic, but if you take a minute yourself, as I've done, to think about your career and you think about some of the hopefully wonderful relationships that you've established, it makes a difference. And so thinking about how you can create that culture in your workplace where connections are happening, networks are building, there's mentorship, and there's also a feeling of being accepted so that your work environment is welcoming and helpful, that there's a real desire to help people, not a sense of teamwork, not competitiveness, individual to individual. A sense of connection and community also depends on trust. And, to build trust between an employee and their leaders, or even among colleagues, requires listening, taking people seriously, responding to their concerns. I think it's important for management, leadership, to explain the reasons for changing. We are living in a time right now with a lot of change going on, a lot of uncertainty going on. That's true regardless of where you are in the political spectrum. And within the workplace, if there is also uncertainty, it's helpful for employee well-being if leaders can at least speak up and talk about what they know. And if there are things that they don't know, to say that too, honestly, and to explain the reasons for changes. so that people don't feel that they're just being yanked around for no particular reason, but that when changes are made at work, there is reasoning behind it, logic, and they're in on it. So that's connection and community. The third essential is a work-life harmony. Notice it's not balance. I'm not sure true balance is achievable, but it's harmonizing work and life. And this, according to the Surgeon General's framework, focuses on employees having autonomy and flexibility. Now, I know that's not possible with every job and every role, but to the extent possible, can you support people with autonomy, having control over when, where, and how they do the work? Now, if there's a role that's got to be performed in the workplace on a certain schedule, perhaps the autonomy comes from the order in which something is accomplished, or from not micromanaging the person. So if the employee has an idea of how to do something more efficiently, better, more comfortably, maybe we're open to that change, and the person has some autonomy in the accomplishment of the work. The flexibility also has to do with offering flexible schedules when you can, flexible accommodations when required. And Andrea will talk about accommodations. Also around scheduling, be mindful that when an employee's schedule is unstable, unpredictable, they don't know when, where they're going to be called upon, that's inherently stressful. So to the extent possible within your workplace, and I do understand, of course, that in some workplaces, this is a bigger challenge, but to the extent possible, try to have predictable scheduling. Try to be transparent about what that is. And then another side of this coin is access to paid sick leave, PTO, vacation, other leave policies, and supporting employees, as we'll talk about in a minute, in accessing those benefits and taking the leaves. And then lastly, on this work-life harmony, it's thinking about respecting boundaries between work and home. Liz, in Liz's portion of the presentation, she talked about respecting boundaries around privacy. I want to focus on that too, but boundaries also matter around work and home. And we know those boundaries got awfully blurry during the pandemic. They become blurry during remote work as well, when we sometimes quite literally have visibility into each other's homes and work lives as our family members and pets walk across the screens and whatnot. But to the extent you can respect those boundaries, it makes a difference. Humans need rest and time to recharge and restore. And those boundaries are how we support that. The fourth essential that was identified by the US Surgeon General is mattering at work, literally having dignity and meaning in one's work. And that means being respected and valued. There's a lot of conversation going on right now about DEI efforts and things. That's a story for another day. I'm not going to get into it now, but I bring it up only because it dovetails with this notion of being valued and respected, and making sure that each individual has that dignity. And then meaning is something we can also influence as employers. As employers, we can talk about the connection between an employee's role, their day-to-day job duties, and the mission of the company or organization, why the work matters. And engaging employees in workplace decisions. Now, importantly, engaging people in decisions isn't the whole story, because there's got to be follow through. If you do employee surveys and if you gain all kinds of feedback, that's wonderful. But if you don't act on the feedback, you've got not just a missed opportunity, but you're going to have a decline in trust, because people are then going to wonder, gosh, why did they even bother to ask my opinion if they're not going to do anything about it? So it's engaging people in workplace decisions, engaging in workplace conversations, and then with that follow through and the explanation for decisions, the explanation for change. It's also very helpful for employee well-being, happiness, retention, all these things, to have a workplace culture of gratitude and recognition. This often happens naturally for the big things. You know, a big project is completed and we celebrate, or a big win, we celebrate. That's wonderful. But what about the small things? You know, the way that someone, you know, is just consistently there, that you can steadily count on them because they're always willing to be helpful. That's something that should be applauded. Or that someone, you know, really went out of their way to be helpful or kind or whatnot. So it's this culture of gratitude and recognition. We know there's a ton of science on the benefits of gratitude towards well-being. And then again, that sense of connectivity with the mission. The last essential that I want to talk about, and you'll see this if you look at the framework, is the opportunity for growth. And that's another place where as employers, we can really move that needle. The opportunity for growth is learning. I'm sorry, I got a typo. It's not leaning, it's learning and accomplishment. And so it's making sure that we've got the ability for people to set goals, achieve goals, be recognized for achieving those goals, to gain that sense of accomplishment. That you've got clear or reasonably clear pathways towards career advancement. We know too, from looking at human resource studies and surveys, that having an excellent leader matters a great deal to attracting and retaining employees, as does compensation. But right up there is the ability to advance within your organization. And having that clear pathway for growth matters, as well as providing the training, education, and mentoring to allow a person to elevate themselves. The last point I want to make on this is about relevant and reciprocal feedback. Feedback ought not to be one way, it ought to be two ways. And it ought to be relevant, timely, etc. And on the next slide, we'll get into this a little bit more. I'm a fan of direct conversations. And Liz talked a little bit already about how to start a conversation if you have concerns about someone's well-being and that type of thing. And I wanted to tee it up here in the way that as employers, sometimes, of course, we need to have timely, direct conversations about changes in attendance, performance, productivity, and or behavior. Leaving those things to be addressed at the year-end performance review is not helpful. It's not effective. It's not helpful. You want it to be timely. And like any other performance discussion, it is useful for employee well-being and for reduction of chronic stress to make expectations clear. When expectations are not clear and people are living in uncertainty and discomfort, it's quite stressful. So make expectations clear. Ask what the employee can do to improve. In other words, there can be some benefit to dictating, this is what I need to see from you. But even more benefit to saying, how can you get there? When you're hearing this, what are the steps you envision in your own mind to, get to the level that's expected? How can I help you? Instead of just dictating everything. Again, it's that employee engagement of how can we solve this problem of attendance, performance, productivity, or what have you, and offer those resources if appropriate. Now, if in the context of that direct conversation, if in that context, someone says to you, well, gosh, my performance has slipped because I'm struggling with my mental health. Or if they don't mention it to you, but you yourself have noticed early warning signs, as Liz described, ask how you can help that person. Often, as people, if any of you are HR professionals, I believe you are, looking at the list, or people who are HR savvy, we worry about, I don't want to ask too much about someone's health. A safe question that you can always ask is, how can I help? And offering those resources and keeping the focus on helping the employee to be successful, not on punishing the employee. So again, if you're having a conversation about attendance and someone says, I'm struggling to attend regularly because I'm struggling with anxiety or depression or another mental health condition, you don't necessarily just want to march down the road of punishing the person for violating your attendance policy. The focus is, how can you get the person to achieve the expectation that you need while feeling supported, valued, etc.? On the next slide, I've got some other tips on direct conversations. If an employee in that context shares mental health concerns with you, you want to listen supportively, which by the way means paying complete attention, asking how you can help, encouraging the employee to seek support, use employer resources, and respecting the employee's privacy, which importantly means sharing the information only with someone who has a legitimate need to know. Like if you are not the human resource professional in your organization, sharing the information with HR so that HR can provide appropriate support, but not gossiping about it, not sharing it inappropriately. Andrea is going to do a deeper dive about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the law that requires us as employers to keep medical information confidential. If you are not part of human resources in your organization and an employee starts a conversation with you or in response to you start sharing their mental health concerns, Focus on listening to what the employee wants to share, not on cross-examining them, not on asking detailed questions like, what's your diagnosis? Have you been to a psychiatrist? Do you take medication? Are you seeing a therapist? Don't do that deep dive. Focus on listening, not trying to be that therapist, as Liz said. Because again, that will keep you on safer ground for not slipping into asking questions that ought not to be asked under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Your aim, if you're not part of human resources, your aim should be to listen and support, and then to get the information to human resources so they can obtain any necessary medical information in a confidential manner. On the next slide, I've got a little bit of information about employer programs and resources. I think it is useful and not that hard to create an inventory of all your currently offered benefits and resources, which might include an employee assistance program, ADA reasonable accommodations, FMLA leave, which Andrea will talk about as well, short-term disability, long-term disability, PTO, bereavement leave, health insurance, fitness benefits, flexible schedules, crisis lines, pet-friendly policies, you name it. There might be more that you're offering already than you realize. So if you inventory everything that you offer, thinking broadly, and then if you organize relevant resources together in one place so it's easily accessible to employees. Imagine if you had on your intranet or employee portal a spot where someone could just click if they wanted information about resources for mental health, or if they wanted information for resources for new parents, or for bereavement or caregiver leave, and if it was all together in one place, rather than having to read your employee handbook and pick and choose what might apply. So making it easy for employees to access those resources, educating employees about the resources, which I think is helpful to do in bite-sized pieces. Many employers do a beautiful job of this at open enrollment, but that occurs only once a year. And you never know when someone might need something. So consider a weekly or bi-weekly little bite-sized blurb about a benefit that you offer so that you can hit people at a time when it might be useful to them. And then on the next slide, remove barriers to resource utilization. Consider awareness, access, and ease of use. There's a huge gap. We know this statistically. There's a big gap between the benefits that employers offer and spend a lot of money on and employee utilization. And sometimes that gap is because people are afraid, as Liz mentioned. They might be afraid of retaliation or of stigma. And one of the things that employers can do is really thinking about what are the barriers, identify what barriers might exist in your workplace and remove them. One example that I have here is providing support for someone taking a leave of absence for a mental health condition, for example. Making sure that the manager of that individual helps the employee organize their workload to take leave. That's, of course, assuming the leave is planned. If it's unplanned, so be it. Covering the workload for the employee so things aren't just piling up endlessly in their absence. And then ensuring a smooth transition back to work with good communication about how things were covered when the person was out and where they stand. And then some, final thoughts on the next slide from an employee relations perspective. It's keeping in mind that stress, burnout, and mental health conditions are really common. Liz shared with you some statistics, and it's interesting generationally how that commonality is increasing. They're present in every workplace. Employees experiencing mental health conditions can be successful at work. Absolutely, with support, resources, and accommodations. And remember too, that what you say and do matters. You really can, as a leader in your organization, you can move the needle on employee well-being, and it's worth doing. My last slide, I'm not going to speak about, but I wanted you to have it in the package that you'll receive afterwards. This is available resources with hyperlinks for you to utilize in your workplace. And now I will turn it over to Andrea. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. And I'm going to cover some of what we consider to be the legal obligations. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk about FMLA and ADA in particular. Those were mentioned as factors or benefits that would be available when you have an employee who's dealing with a mental health issue. But I wanted to really kind of focus on these two, and I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about FMLA, because I think we sometimes forget that it is available for people who need to take time off to deal with a mental health condition. We talk about a lot of, medical conditions being physical conditions or, needing medical interventions for things like surgeries, or disabilities related to pregnancy, but we forget too sometimes that it applies to mental health conditions. And FMLA, a lot of times, I think we need to kind of shift our focus to say, this is a part of a culture of caring to have FMLA leave available because it's job protected leave available. So it applies to employers with 50 or more employees. Now, if you have less than 50 employees, you can always, really consider having perhaps some kind of personal or medical leave similar to FMLA, but maybe not as complex, maybe not for a full 12 weeks, but have something available as part of your sort of as Jen talked about, sort of those types of benefits available for folks. And then also keep in mind too, that under the ADA, you might be obligated to provide some kind of reasonable leave of absence as an accommodation, even if you have less than 50 employees. Or if you have 50 or more employees and you've given the person FMLA time, sometimes under the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, it is a reasonable accommodation to extend that leave beyond 12 weeks in order for the person to be able to get back to work. But, some of the basics are all applicable, that, up to 12 weeks for reasons of either the employees or the employee's family member who may have a mental health condition. I focus a little bit on that definition of serious health condition because how does that look when it's applied to a mental health condition? It could be that the person doesn't come to work because they've had to check themselves into a hospital to get some treatment for severe depression or anxiety. Or it could be that they are out 3 or more days because of a mental health issue. That should be sort of the bell that rings in your head to say, oh, this could be covered by the Family Medical Leave Act. It also covers chronic conditions, meaning they're not out for 3 consecutive days, but they are out on an intermittent basis, and they're under the care of a healthcare provider. And keep in mind, with mental health conditions, your healthcare provider may not necessarily be the person's PCP or their orthopedic person. It could very well be a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a clinical social worker. The definition of healthcare provider also includes any licensed medical professional that your group health insurance would accept for coverage. So it could be definitely a licensed social worker or a substance use disorder counselor. So keep in mind that is a broader way of thinking about FMLA. Next slides, please. So I wanted to kind of give you a quick example of what that looks like when that happens. So a person may need leave for 4 weeks because they're going to be receiving inpatient care and then follow-up therapy with adjusting new medications to treat a PTSD or depression. And then thereafter, they may have a medical certification that says that they may have flare-ups and need unexpected intermittent leave beyond that. That's how it could very easily happen. And in your discussion with the employee, it's important to understand, that this is job protected leave. This is there to help you deal with a situation that is just as serious as any physical condition. So it's how you have those good conversations with them and offering that. And keep in mind, FMLA also applies to also provides military caregiver leave, which can be up to 26 weeks, because the employee's family member is a veteran who has a serious health condition that was incurred or aggravated during military service. And one of the things that is common is that when they come back from military service, they may seem fine, but then later develop severe symptoms of PTSD or depression, and that may manifest, and therefore the employee is needed to help take care of them. So that's important too, and I want to just bring that to your attention. Next slide. So I wanted to also talk a little bit about a case that I think really kind of goes to the heart of the matter. Jen and Liz talked about, if you notice there's a change of behavior in a person, at what point do you sort of become involved, and what can you do about it? And actually, you may have a legal obligation to offer FMLA leave. The case of Valdivia versus Township High School, I think, was such an interesting and heartbreaking case of an employee who had a history of excellent performance reviews, stellar performance, never made a mistake, and then began to have insomnia, weight loss. She would have uncontrollable crying that would make her have to leave early in the day. She had difficulty concentrating. She complained about these specific things to her boss, who offered no help. She asked for transfers. She asked for a different position, and the boss was just, look, at either you stay or you go. So did not offer FMLA. Well, the employee ended up by suing and won. And the reason was that the employer violated the FMLA because it failed to give her notice or any information about her rights to take job protected leave. So even though FMLA is usually triggered by an employee saying, I need time off for a health condition, in certain circumstances, this was pretty severe, but it highlights that if an employee is exhibiting a change, an adverse change in their behavior, consider in your approach to them, as Jen outlined, having those conversations with them, offering them a leave and saying, look, there are times, and FMLA people like, oh, I don't want to use my FMLA leave now. I don't need that. I'm okay. And that's where you say, no, FMLA leave is something that is available to you. It lets you take the time off you need from your full-time job to full-time focus on your mental health and then be able to get back to work. So it's something that I think you can talk to them about as, hey, this is all part of how we can support you. And I gave you a couple of, links that will be live links for you. There's a very good fact sheet that the U.S. Department of Labor put out about the FMLA mental health, and then also an FAQ, which I think is helpful. Next slide, please. So the ADA and New Hampshire law against discrimination also, in addition to prohibiting discrimination against people with mental health conditions, mental health disabilities, requires you to provide reasonable accommodation. And these laws can apply to employers small as with having 6 or more employees. So you have, if you're a small employer, but you have more than 6 employees, you have legal obligations to provide reasonable accommodations. When it's in connection with mental health conditions as disabilities, that can be a little bit more challenging, but it's still something that you can address, and you can address again from a position of caring and support, because it's really providing an accommodation to the person so that it allows them to perform the essential functions of their job. And so it's important to think about, what does that mean? It's a disability that the EEOC has said some conditions, mental health conditions, could easily be found to be disabilities. Major depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, OCD, and schizophrenia among them. Those are specifically mentioned in the regulations. Things like general irritability, anger management issues, chronic lateness is not necessarily mental health conditions, right, or disabilities. And in addition, it's important to remember that if a person is engaging in serious misconduct or unsatisfactory performance, or they are currently engaging in the use of illegal drugs or under the influence of alcohol in the job, those are not protected activities. You can still apply your policies, but in a manner that really balances the ability to give that person an opportunity to get better, but also balances the disruption to the operation. So it's important to remember those items as well. Next slide. So what does it? I think a lot of employers get challenged by, well, when it's a mental health condition, how do I accommodate this? Do I have to put up with, tolerate, behavior that is out of the norm or not reasonable or disruptive? And you want to be able to say, well, let's look at what it what a reasonable accommodation would look like for somebody with mental health challenges. And it could be anything from work breaks, some stuff that Jen talked about flexibility, additional time off, a change in supervisory methods, not necessarily a change in a supervisor, but perhaps how that supervisor manages and gives instruction to an employee, as opposed to the person may feel that they need more structure, and therefore more written instructions as opposed to just verbal instructions. Eliminating non-essential job functions could be something to help alleviate stress, but again, only if those job functions are non-essential. Allowing the person to telework, perhaps allowing that person to bring in an emotional support animal, providing a rest area for that person. I have a client that is dealing with a new employee who, once they were hired, indicated that they need a private place to go when needed because of panic attacks or oncoming migraines. And the question was whether they had to provide an office or that the person could share perhaps the lactation break room. They've had to kind of work with it. And then so there's other things too, reducing noise or lights to help with the stress issues. So those are all issues that you can look at, but you need to have a conversation with the employee about that. Before I go on to that, I wanted to just mention the confidentiality requirements. Both the ADA and the FMLA require employers to keep all information related to a person's medical condition, their request for accommodation, or a request for a leave for medical reasons. All that needs to be confidential, except for the following circumstances, and there's some exceptions to that, but that's something that you want to focus on as well, and make sure you can assure the employee that there's confidentiality. Next slide. The big thing with ADA is the interactive process, and this is all tied up with everything that Jen talked about and Liz talked about. It's all part of, I think, sometimes that interactive process. If the person is indicating they need a change of something, which is where a reasonable accommodation may come in, you have to go through if the accommodation is not an obvious fix, then steps to an interactive process is really having an open conversation with the individual to ascertain what are the job-related limitations. As Jen said, and as Liz said, you're not there to diagnose, you're not there to offer diagnosis, you're there to focus on conduct. You're there to focus on what are the limitations within the job and related to the job that the person is struggling with. You can request medical information from a healthcare provider to both verify the disability and understand the limitations that could be overcome with accommodation. And then you really want to work closely with the employee to say what are potential accommodations, and then have a period of time, even if you're not sure you're willing to try something, but you're not sure it's going to work, say, okay, let's try this on a temporary basis. Let's try this accommodation and see how it goes, and then have a reassessment built into the process. And then finally, I just want to say we could do deep dives on ADA and FMLA all day long, but I wanted to give you some resources that are specific to these laws in how they deal with mental health. And I can't advocate enough for the Jobs Accommodation Network, which is unbelievable, the amount of information that is on their websites. They're on their website, and that they are very accessible, that you can call and have a conversation with a counselor to say, hey, I've got this employee, they're having difficulty with a particular, mental health issue. What types of accommodations can I offer them? This is the job, this is the person's limitations, what can I do? They're willing to work with you. But they have a wealth of information on their website, specifically a whole webpage dedicated to mental health conditions under the ADA. And I really like the accommodation solutions for executive functioning deficits, because that goes into more of a deep dive about if someone's struggling with time management, memory, concentration, organization and prioritizing, that what other types of strategies we can use or offer to that person as an accommodation. And then finally, there's another tool that is little known but can help. When you're trying to get good medical information from the person's healthcare provider, a lot of times they're not that up on what you what the ADA means and what types of information you need. And the EEOC has a guidance for mental health providers on what their role is in supporting a client's request for accommodation. It explains the ADA, explains the type of information the employer needs. And sometimes if you have an employee who you need a medical certification from, giving them that guidance to bring to their healthcare provider may actually help facilitate the good type of communication you need from both the employee and the healthcare provider. So those are a couple of specific resources. I want to go back to Liz to talk about, because she has some other resources she wants to mention to you. So thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. So in talking about our resources, one of the first resources that I want to offer is to have people reach out to NAMI New Hampshire Information and Resource Line. So this is not a crisis line. It is a place where you are going to leave a message and one of our trained staff members will give a call back. But if you are questioning how to approach a conversation with a neighbor, with a family member, with a coworker, this is a place where you can call. They can also connect you to some of the resources that NAMI New Hampshire office offers. Our education and support programs at no cost. So talking to you a little bit about how you might point a person in the right direction. So if you want just more information about someone to talk about something, about a questioning a mental health condition, NAMI New Hampshire, this information resource line is a great place. There's very low barriers. We're really looking for, it's very conversational. So we're not looking to take a lot of information about who you are. And it's just about having a conversation, point you in the right direction. There's the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Thank you. So that is to call a chat at 988, and that is available. To you or to a person who is in crisis. So, and just so you are aware, crisis is self-defined. So if you feel like it's a crisis, it's a crisis. If the person feels like it's a crisis, it's a crisis. And then lastly is this free guide. So this QR code will connect you to some free guides for employees, managers, and leaders on stigma-free. So there's lots of really great, really very specific guides that are on there, and they're well laid out as to who they are directed to. So if you want to know a little bit more about how to approach conversations, or even how to create this culture. Part of what you might find on there is some links to specific days, some social media images that you can use to be able to, again, create a culture at your organization where people can feel like it's approachable to talk about mental health. Next slide. And then the other way is to get ways to get involved with NAMI New Hampshire. Our walk is coming up. NAMI Walks New Hampshire is coming up on Sunday, October 5th. And so you can register. One of the things that Jen mentioned is to, you're creating a place of social support and belonging. Well, this is a great opportunity to do that. You can share with your organization, create a team, and sponsor the event. The walk is a free event. Over 2,000 people join us annually for the walk, and it is just a fun event to be able to say that you're creating a culture where it is supportive of mental health. And that is it from me.
Wow, that was fantastic. Thank you all. We do have some questions. I wish we had more time for questions because there are so many things that I think that we could talk about based on the volume of information that you just presented. But let me dive right in. Question from the audience. What if I don't have an HR department or an HR person? And I think that that probably applies to a lot of companies that don't have sort of that robust structure. How do small businesses make this work?
I think I'll jump in. I think the most important thing is to identify who in your organization wears the HR hat, even if you don't have a specific human resource function. there's somebody doing it. There's somebody working with benefits, payroll, some other things. And so making sure that that person's identified, people know who to go to, and that that person does the best they can to stay educated. And then thinking about other resources, whether it be outsourced HR support, your friendly employment lawyer, whatever. But it's identifying within the organization who wears that hat.
Yeah, I'll add that there are a lot of HR consultants fractional HR consultants who can provide outside, outsourced support, help you with bringing policies together, help you with some employee relations issues, that it might be worth investing in that if that's an important part of what you need.
Okay. This question, I want to direct it first to Andrea, but anybody can take it. And it relates to your slide where you were showing reasonable accommodations. And I think this is kind of a heavy question, but basically, what if the condition that somebody has really precludes them from fulfilling the function of that position at all? How do you get there, and how do you work through that in a compassionate way?
Focus on, I think the first approach I always say is focus on the job performance. Focus on what is, what the job expectation is, what it is they're supposed to be doing, and in a compassionate way, in a constructive criticism way, explain how they're not meeting that. And then always then come back to, so how can we help? What do you, try to engage the employee in a conversation of what do you need for support to try to do it. Show that you have tried to work with them, show that you've tried to give them that heads up that, hey, things are not going well. How do we get this back on track? What are the performance issues? And then if that doesn't seem to be working, then under the ADA, if there is no other reasonable accommodation that would allow that person to do the essential functions, they're just not able to do it, then you look, the accommodation of last resort is look to see if you can transfer them to another position that you have available, not that you have to create a work, but that you have available that they're qualified to do, that may allow to accommodate their limitations. But it's a process, and it's going to have to be an interactive process. But I always say you focus on the job performance.
Thank you. Another question. How does FMLA impact seasonal businesses with less than 50 employees?
So if you have less than 50 employees throughout the year, then you're not subject to FMLA, and you don't have to comply with FMLA, but you may very well have to comply with the ADA and offer some kind of leave for the person to be able to get back to work eventually. But with seasonal employees, you have to be careful because the ADA, the FMLA says that it applies if you have 50 or more employees for 20 or more work weeks in the year. So you're a seasonal employee, you look at your heavy season. And if you have ramped up from, let's say, 20 employees to 75 employees, you have to actually look through your pay period, your payroll, to say, how many weeks did I have over 50 on my payroll? And if it's in the prior year and in the current year.
Okay. Another question from the audience is, any recommendations for correcting colleagues that use mental health language in the workplace, as was described earlier? For example, she can be very bipolar or whatnot. And this is interesting. The way I read that question, it seems like peers correcting each other, which seems like it could be fraught or more challenging than a manager. But I'll leave it to you guys to explain.
One of my suggestions would be to offer a stigma-free presentation at your workplace. So I give you a short little part of our presentation, but you certainly can reach out and we can do a longer presentation, which also has a handout in which you just can consider why language matters and why shifting your language just a little bit perhaps makes it feel like it's approachable. So I think, there is a little activity that we can do a part of that, which it's not about correcting your language or saying that it's wrong or bad. It's just getting you to shift your perspective and think about why changing your language might be important. Also, to direct people to that stigma-free site that I shared that QR code with, there is a Language Matters handout that's available on there. Maybe post that somewhere where it's visible. It just gets people to think a little bit differently about why their language would be important, to just give it a little bit of a change.
No, thank you. Well, that brings us to the hour. So it went by very quickly. I appreciate you all. Liz, Jen, Andrea, great material. And I know we had somebody drop off and leave a note in the chat that they had to drop off, but that it was a great presentation. I think we'll hear feedback like that in general. We'll also mention one of the other questions was, will the slides be sent out? They will. You'll all receive a copy of this presentation. And speaking of you, the audience, we also appreciate you being here. Really grateful for your attention. Thank you to Sheehan Finney for sponsoring today's webinar. Once again, I'm Ernesto Burden. I'm the publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. An honor and a pleasure to be here presenting this with you. And with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.